Good morning. Morning. I'd like to welcome everyone who's joining us today. Our activity, as well as being face-to-face, is also being recorded and will be shared through the official UMCE YouTube channel. En primer lugar, quiero saludar muy cordialmente al decano de la Facultad de Historia, Geografía y Letras de nuestra universidad, Dr. Jaime Galgani Muñoz. Saludamos también a la directora del Departamento de Inglés, profesora María Eugenia Hernández. También saludamos al profesor Héctor Ortiz Lira, que nos acompaña hoy, académicas y académicos del departamento, estudiantes y todos y todas quienes nos acompañan hoy. Now I'd like to welcome our speaker today, Professor Richard Ogden, who's a phonetician and conversation analyst. He's worked on data in English, Finnish, and British Sign Language, among others. His work combines phonetic detail, that is the way that sounds of speech are organized, with conversation analytic methodology, as a way of working out how people use aspects of speech to perform social actions, such as turn-taking, agreeing, complaining, and telling stories. In recent years, he's worked on non-lexical sounds in speech like clicks, swallows, and more recently, laughter. He's the author of An Introduction to English Phonetics. We have the third edition in 2024, and many of you have read that work. He frequently teaches short courses at York and abroad. He's currently the director of the Humanities Research Center at York. On a more personal note, Professor Ogden was my supervisor for both my MA and my PhD at York. During that time, I was able to learn immensely and also get exceptional support and advice from him. So having him here is a great honor and privilege. Let's give a warm welcome to Professor Richard Ogden.
I think we're live. Thank you for that very nice, warm introduction, Veronica. Veronica's going to be my assistant and push the button for the slides. Can you get the next one? Thank you. So here's what I want to do today. I want to show how everyday language can be explored in empirical ways. And what we're going to be looking at is something that you might think of as tone of voice, which for conventional phonetics has been a real problem of study. Most approaches in phonetics to this kind of topic do things like give people recordings of somebody else's speech, and then they say, what do you think they were saying? Or how do you think it felt? And that kind of thing. My method is going to be very different from that. I want to show you how we can look at what the speakers themselves are doing to make sense of the tone of voice that we hear. And the phenomenon that you're going to see is a very familiar one. So yes, do one and then another. So here's an outline of the phenomenon, and you can see this online really easily. So this is the written version of what you're going to hear today. So, you know, if you look for things like so, whatever, you find lots of these things on Twitter and YouTube and so on. Can you do the next one? Here's some more. So when I was a kid, the Kellogg's Frosties were advertised by Tony the Tiger, and Frosties were great, right? Then we have a huge banana split, a huge day, and totally, and we're going to hear lots of words like this with the corresponding pronunciations to these spellings. So here's a few spoken examples just so you can hear the phenomenon. I think you just have to hit the arrow.
I'd walk in there and like 5 people would say hello to me.
So do you hear she says there 5 people, not I walk in there and like 5 people. I walk in there and like 5 people. It's stretched out, it's emphatic, it's intensified. Can you do the next one?
You'd be nuts if you went in.
You hear that? Nuts. You'd be nuts if you went in. And the next
Well,
one.
the traffic.
Well, the traffic. I'm going to say a lot more about that one soon. And the last
Joel then turned up the day after I arrived and drove us mad.
So we weren't just slightly angry, we were really angry. And we all have that sense, I guess, that these things mean something more than what they say. The words are there, but the sense is stronger. And so part of the task of this talk is to work out, how do we know that? So the data comes from American English. It's Call Home. Call Home was made in the 90s. People were given a free phone call to anywhere in the world for half an hour. The only condition was that they had to be recorded. And in the 90s, a phone call abroad was really expensive, so this was a good deal. And there's a lot of data, and it's really nice data. Most of it is gossip and people just catching up with each other and, the kinds of things that people do on phone calls. You're going to hear a small number of examples, but I have a collection of about 120 from about 27 of these calls, which altogether is 540 minutes of talk. And when you see underlining in the transcripts, that's how intensification is marked. So we're going to start off with a phonetic description of the phenomenon. And I don't know how familiar you are with spectrograms. It doesn't matter that much. Now, Veronica, you need one arrow to go forward.
We had a bash.
And then to hear it again.
We had a bash.
We had a bash. So there's actually a lot going on here. First of all, you can hear that, well, here's the word bash, bash. And you can see that the word bash, which has only got b-a-sh, 3 phonemes in it, that takes up a lot of time, whereas we had a, that's very fast. So the talk before the intensified thing is usually fast. The bash word has a very long closure for the b, which is here, and the closure for the b starts with voicing, which in Spanish is perfectly normal, but in English is not. So the very fact that we've got voicing here is an interesting fact. The other thing that's kind of unusual is that this word here is not a or a, but a. We had a bash, so we have a full form, and the full form is preceded with a glottal stop. So it says we had a bash. So even though a is fast, it's a full form, and it's kind of marked out already. So the phenomenon is not just about what happens when we say bash, it's also what happens before we say bash. Can you hit the left arrow, then the right arrow, so we can just hear it again?
We had a bash.
Okay. Now we have another example which is similar but different. Can you play
Irv
this one?
had a major heart attack.
Irv had a major heart attack. So here the intensified word is major. And here's the m. It's a very long one. It's 260 milliseconds, which is approximately 4 times as long as a m is usually. So these are really long sounds. What you can also see on the spectrogram is that the beginning and the end of the nasal are very clear. And in English, this is not that common, actually. And what it's indicating is that the lips are making a really tight, sudden closure. In other words, it's not a slow articulation, it's a fast and very tight one. Can you just play it one more time?
Irv had a major heart attack.
Okay. And then the next one. Oh, yeah. Oh, this is a lovely one. Can you play this one?
I did. The baby Jack is huge.
Now, this one's really interesting because it's got rhythm to it. She says, I did. The baby Jack is huge. And the stars here, you can hear it's very rhythmically produced. Approximately every half second, there's a beat. I did. The baby Jack is huge, and huge is just a little bit late. It doesn't quite come on the beat, it comes just a little bit after the beat, and that, I think, is part of the sense of dramatic pause. So it's slightly delayed. You can also see that this has got a very sharp onset, so it starts very abruptly, and you can hear that the pitch is very high and very dynamic. Can you play it again?
I did. The baby Jack is huge.
Get that? Can we hear it one more time?
I did. The baby Jack is huge.
Isn't that great? So there's a whole family of practices around intensification. And we'll just start to see a summary of these. So they're intonationally prominent. That usually means that they've got higher pitch than what came before, but not always. Sometimes it just means that the pitch moves a bit more than it might. They've got a tensor articulatory setting. That's to say the articulations for the consonants around these things are really tight. And they're produced more slowly with the consonants and vowels typically stretched. And we could say a lot more about that, but I'm not going to today. And before the intensified item, we find several other things happening. We find gaps like little silences, micro pauses, glottal stops, and the speech before it is a little bit faster. Now, just to compare the durations of these things with the durations of typical speech, this is really fun. So this is a paper, a really classic paper from 1988. It's based on hundreds of measurements of sounds of American speech. And on the top is what typical nasals look like, and on the bottom is what typical stops look like. So this is a distribution of how many and what duration. So you can see that, for example, most nasals are about 60, 70 milliseconds. That's where the majority, that's the duration of the majority of nasals. And then there are some nasals that are about 150 milliseconds, but not very many of those. If I plot the duration of the consonants in my intensified words and put them on top of that, that's where they are. So you can see that the consonants in these intensified words are not typical. And one of the things that we could say is that conventionally phonetics is interested in typical, average, normal events. And it's not interested usually in these extreme things. It says, they're just individual habit or something like that. Whereas if we're looking at interaction, we want to understand why they like that. What are people doing with those? They're rare. What's the story? Why are they doing this? So that's why the numbers of cases we're looking at are relatively small, and it's why we need to not take an average kind of look at the speech. So there's a summary of where they are. The intensified sounds are nothing like the typical ones. They're on the extreme margin of the typical ones. And we can also look at what gets upgraded. Let's see the next one. So for the most part, the things that get upgraded are adjectives and modifiers and adverbs. So huge, intense, major, disastrous, cheap, alive. These are the commonest sorts of things to get intensified, along with modifiers like really, very, totally, and so on. But interestingly, we have also got a small number of nouns. We're going to look at a couple of nouns like party, traffic, rocks, main. What does it mean to say main in an intense way? Save that one for the questions. Quantifiers and numbers, they also are there. And then sometimes verbs like smell and believe, curiously. We're going to look at a few nouns, and we're going to look at quite a lot of adjectives and modifiers. Okay, so now the talk goes into the conversation analytic arguments, and I've structured this to reflect the kinds of argumentation methods that we use in conversation analysis. So this big blue banner is one of the key things about CA. We're interested in what else co-occurs with the thing we're interested in. So what are the co-occurring features in the same speaker's talk? Well, here's a very common pattern that we find in the data. Firstly, speaker A makes an assessment, and then speaker B somehow resists that, and then speaker A makes the assessment again, but this time in a stronger, upgraded or intensified way. So I've got some examples of these, and I'm going to do this in a really nice CA way. So we're going to reveal them line by line. Here we've got a brother and a sister. B is the brother, the other person is his sister. B has got his sister's friend staying with him. This friend is a nuisance. This friend has just left a note that says, "I want a key." And this is the brother's response to, "I want a key." Can you play the audio?
I mean, talk about a little bit rude.
Okay, talk about a little bit rude. And then, next one. What does his sister do? She says, "Well." Can you play that one?
Well,
Okay. Now, she could here have agreed. She could have come in earlier, but she comes in a little bit late. And well is a very good way of marking upcoming trouble, resistance. And you can hear that this is the beginning of something that does not agree with rude. And so let's see how he treats that. His response...
That's really rude, if you ask me.
An upgraded, intensified repeat of the first thing. So we've got the modifier, really, and that gets intensified. But it's the same basic assessment. That's really rude, if you ask me. Can you do the left arrow and the right arrow again?
That's really rude, if you ask me.
Thank you. So now we'll hear the whole sequence. The arrow.
That's really rude, if you ask me.
Okay. No.
I was just...
and so I think
And
that's
no, but
what
anyway,
I
he
think.
doesn't call, and Friday, and all I do is get this message, "I want a key." I mean, talk about a little bit rude, I'm sorry. That's
Well.
really rude, if you ask me. It's just like, well, I just want to use you for something here.
Okay, so that's the basic, that's one of the common sequences. You make an assessment, the other person resists it, you do the assessment again, but this time it's intensified. In other words, it's stronger. I'm going to see the same thing again now. Oh, this one's fabulous. So here is two sisters. A is organizing B's wedding. They're talking about what are the dresses that the bridesmaids are going to wear. B wants the bridesmaids to wear black dresses. This does not go down well with the parents.
Mom and Dad won't have black.
Mom and Dad won't have black. Can we hear the next one?
They don't want black?
Okay, so an understanding check is the technical term for that, right? They don't want black. And the next one?
They're really opposed to it.
They're really opposed to it, right? So there we have the same thing basically as in the first line, don't want, but a much stronger version of it, really opposed, so that you can see this time the lexical formulation is also stronger, but the phonetics is also stronger. We get the intensification on really. Now we'll hear the whole sequence.
Like you said.
Mom and Dad won't have black.
They don't want black?
They're really opposed to it.
Did you...
Okay, so we have quite a few examples like this. Assessment, resistance, intensified assessment. I think there's another one coming. Oh no, this is the beginning of a story. So B starts asking A, can you just play it?
What was the time in New Mexico like?
Did you hear the rhythm in that? What was the time in New Mexico like? And what she's supposed to do is to come in and go, what was the time in New Mexico like? Great. She's supposed to come in on beat with a positive assessment. Let's see what happens.
Oh, God, it was horrible.
Oh, God, it was horrible. How does he respond to that then? Does he treat that as, a serious thing? Does he accept her assessment as horrible? Let's hear.
Really?
Really? So he questions it and he laughs. He treats this as not serious. So he gives her a slot to continue, but it's on the wrong footing. This is not the kind of story she's going to tell. This is not a funny story. This is a different kind of story. So his understanding of the story so far is that this is not going to be serious. She needs to get it on the right footing. So let's see what she does.
It was horrible.
It was horrible. You hear that? That's a really nice case of intensification, and it's exactly the same turn that same adjective that we had in line 2. So we've got the same thing again. Assessment, resistance, assessment. It's not quite resistance this time, though. It's just something that's not on the right footing. Okay.
Why?
Now he treats it seriously, and now he gives her the go-ahead, and now she can tell the story of why it was horrible. So this is part of the negotiation of everyday talk that we have to do. Let's hear the whole thing.
What was the time in New Mexico like?
Oh, God, it was horrible. It was
Really?
horrible.
Why?
Okay, and then she goes on and she explains all the things that she hated about New Mexico. And here's what it looks like if we do a spectrogram of it. You can see that these two things are approximately the same duration. But remember when I showed you the other examples, the intensified term was longer and slower. And you can see it takes up much more time than it does here, even though here we've got more words and more syllables. You can also hear and see that the in horrible is a lot longer, and it's I can't tell whether this is a little glottal stop or a problem on the line, but anyway, let's move on. So far we've got two versions of something, a first version and a second version, where the first version is a weaker one and the second version is a stronger one. The second version in red gets upgraded. So we get a bit rude, becomes really rude. Won't have gets really opposed. Horrible becomes horrible. Now that third example is kind of interesting because you can see that in the first two cases, we've got a change of modifier. There's other lexical changes going on here between a bit and really, won't have and really opposed. But with horrible, it's horrible versus horrible, right? So it's like that phonetic stuff in the intensified horrible is doing just the same thing as really or very. It's as if they were equivalent functionally. So that's one set of issues. Now we're going to look at what happens when you intensify nouns, and the short story is that when you intensify a noun, you give that noun an affective overlay, so it means something slightly different than a neutral form of it. So the question here is, when is a party more than a party? Next slide. Well, this little bit of conversation is sparked off by the other one. They're two language teachers, and one of them is teaching a group of Russians. The other has just said, oh, and for dinner I'm making borscht tonight. Speaking of which, I had the Russians over. You have never seen so much alcohol. Okay, do you want to play that?
You have never seen so much alcohol consumed by a glass of...
Okay, and the next one? So we get a confirmation check, really? And then it's confirmed with unbelievable.
Really?
And again.
Unbelievable.
And the next one. Now we get an expansion of all the alcohol, so we get examples of what they drank.
They brought all this gin and vodka.
You can hear a bit of laughter in the background. And then the next one. And then really, gin. So clearly the hard liquor is salient to the argument.
Really, gin?
Right, okay. And then the next one. And now here we have the intensified form. This isn't the one we're really interested in, but this still is intensified. I don't know how it is in Spanish, but in English you can take almost any word you like, and if you say it in the right way, it means drunk. And so this is, I had to look this one up.
They got schnockered.
It's a good word, isn't it? Okay, so far what we've got is a lot of alcohol, and we're not talking, beer and lemonade. We're talking vodka and gin. We're talking about people who drank so much that they could barely stand. And now, play that.
We had a party here.
That's when a party is not just a party, when it's intensified. We had a party here, right? And you can hear it's very high-pitched, it's stretched out, it's got aspiration, it's got all these intense features that we've already heard with the adjectives. And we know that this is not a polite little party where people are standing around drinking sherry and taking the occasional olive. And let's carry on. Okay, yeah.
Wow.
So that's how it gets recited. Wow. I'm going to look at the responses soon. And I'll play it again.
Dancing around, spilling stuff, still sticky everywhere you walk. I really have to clean.
Right, so this is why it's a party, because they were not standing around, they were dancing, they were spilling, and the floor got messy. Let's hear the whole sequence.
So guess what? I made borscht. So I'm going to have borscht and potato tonight.
Good.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, I had the Russians come to the party on Thursday.
Oh, yeah?
We had a bash.
Oh, my God.
You have never seen so much alcohol consumed by a glass of...
Really?
Unbelievable.
Oh.
They brought all this gin and vodka.
Really, gin?
They got schnockered.
Oh, my God.
We had a party here.
Wow.
Dancing around, spilling stuff, still sticky everywhere you walk. I really have to clean.
Did you get your rug put in? Your new carpet?
No,
Okay, so that's one example of an intensified noun. We're going to hear another one now. This is about traffic. What's worse than traffic? And you can guess what the answer is. It's traffic. Okay, so A is describing how she drove to a city that she didn't know. And unfortunately, when she arrived, there was a big game going on. I don't know what kind of game it was.
Well, we arrived just as the traffic was going in for the game. Oh, I didn't know there was a game.
Okay, and the next one. B can see that there's trouble coming, and we get, oh no, and then a click and an O.
Oh, no.
Again.
Oh.
Oh. Yeah, one more. And now A goes on and she says how she didn't know the city, she didn't know where she was going. I was just following the directions.
I didn't even know where I was going, I was just following the directions.
So far, A is describing a situation where she's got a problem, there's a lot of traffic, she's got lost, she's in a place she doesn't know where she's going. And now let's hear what she says.
Well, the traffic.
Well, the traffic. Right now, she doesn't say anything about the traffic, she just says the traffic. She doesn't say the traffic was terrible, she doesn't say there was a lot of traffic, but we know that the traffic was terrible and that there was a lot of it because of the way she says it, right? And also we know that this is a problem for her because of the way she describes the event of driving to the city.
I was beside myself. I said, oh, my goodness.
So this is a very polite woman. She doesn't use words like schnockered. She says, oh, my goodness. But she does describe her mental state, which was, I was beside myself. So we can see that this, from her point of view, this is not a happy story. Okay, let's hear the
Well,
whole
we
thing.
arrived just as the traffic was going in for the game.
Oh, no.
Well, I didn't know there was a game. I mean, I didn't even know where I was going. You know, I was just following the directions. Well, the traffic, I was beside myself. I said, oh, my goodness.
Okay, so now let's see on the next slide. Here's the difference between plain things. There's a plain party, and there's an intensified party, and we've got the same for traffic. Right, so on the left is traffic, on the right is traffic. Right. And we can see that that's not just our understanding of it, that's their understanding of it, and as conversation analysts, that's what we're interested in. How do they make sense of this? Okay, now we're going to look at some numbers and extreme case formulations. This is another aspect of the design of these turns. And extreme case formulations are where you use words like these, not simple words like schnockered, or you don't use simple words like drunk or don't want or unwell or whatever, big. These are, if we think of adjectives as having a whole, spectrum of meanings, these things are from either the good end or the bad end, but they're strong adjectives. We're going to see some examples of this now. So here we have, this is a really, I don't really understand what the deal is here, but they had pecan pie, and can you just play the whole thing? It's the right arrow. Is there not an audio? Okay.
Partly,
Okay, well, never mind. So they had, we'll come back to this actually. We've got pecan pie, huge pieces. We're going to hear this actually later. It's cut into 6, so 6 pieces of a pie, which doesn't get very much of an uptake. And then in line 7, she says, or even 5. Now, if there were 5 pieces, that means they were even bigger, right? Huge pieces. So we have another intensified thing, and then we get a wow. Maybe we didn't have the audio for these. Okay. We're going to come to these then. So the next one is overwhelming. So overwhelming, not just busy, but overwhelming. And then she describes how much work she had to do and why it was overwhelming. And one of the things that Anita Pomerantz notices when people make complaints is they often use numbers, and they use extreme case formulations. Numbers, because numbers give us a sense of objective reality. If we can say how many, how long, how much, that gives us a good argument. I'm sure you've all been taught that through your education. Well, she's taken this to heart because she comes home, she does classes for 6 hours a day, then she comes home and she does 25 hours of homework. So she has days which are 31 hours long. No wonder it's overwhelming. Okay.
But partly I'm so busy. Oh, God, this course, Joseph, was so overwhelming this year. I mean, we were in class about 6 hours a day, and then you had to go home and do about 25 hours worth of homework to get ready for the next day. Just
so like worse than Middlebury.
Okay, so this is not literal. But you can see what she's doing is she's providing a reason for why she described this as overwhelming, because it's more than anyone can handle. Okay, next one. So, numbers give us external or objective evidence. So that's what we like to think anyway. And they present an assessment as something reasonable. It's reasonable for me to feel like this because there's too much or there's too little of something. And that makes it easier for somebody else to agree with you. If I say to you, I've got 26 hours of homework to do, I mean, what are you going to do? You have to say, oh, no, poor you. You can't say, oh, well, that's normal. I do 36. Okay, let's go on. Now let's see what the recipient does, that is, the other person. How do they treat intensification? And this is going to be quite revealing. So first, here's just a sample of the responses that we've got. And many of these you've already seen. So can you just play them?
Oh, God, this course, Joseph, was so overwhelming this year.
So he does, it's very quiet, you can't really hear, but he says wow, and he says wow in overlap with her laughter straight after she's just said how overwhelming it is. The next one is when she says eaten alive. This Mary Jane went to a convent which was full of fleas.
Carol Ann said she was eaten alive.
No.
Yesterday.
Oh.
And that
Right, so you can hear a sort of sympathy response. They're like, no, oh, right? And the next one is also a sort of sympathy response. She's had a 4th stroke.
Yeah, she's had her 4th stroke. And
oh gosh.
That one's rather quiet. No.
Oh, God, this course, Joseph, was so overwhelming this year.
Carol Ann said she was eaten alive.
No.
Yesterday.
Oh.
And that
yeah, she's had her 4th stroke. And
oh gosh.
Okay, and now the next slide. Here's some more. Oh, this one is really, if you're my age, this one is so rude. Can you just play the first example?
I thought he was kind of cute, but he was like totally enamored of me
Wow.
immediately, which was very suspect.
Even
I mean,
when
before
even
even
though
knew
you're
me.
older and everything.
Yeah.
None of you laughed. I thought he was kind of cute, but he was like totally enamored of me. So there's a mismatch here between what she thinks of him and what he thinks of her. And then the response to that is an immediate click and a wow. Wow. And then the rude part, even though you're older and everything. And then the next one, oh, you've heard these before, but let's...
We had a bash.
Oh my God.
And the next one.
They got schnockered.
Oh, my
we had a party here.
Okay, so you see a pattern. There's certain things that you do in response to these. You say things like, wow, oh my God, gosh. They have to be responses that are, in some sense, valenced. They are not neutral. They're not, oh, They're not that. They have to have some kind of display that, oh, that's something worth hearing. You told me that for a reason, right? It's not neutral. That's the next slide. So, in other words, these responses treat the turn that's intensified as somehow remarkable, newsworthy, something unexpected. It's not just new information. It's not neutral. These are marked. So this is a normal way to respond to intensification. First, a turn with intensification, and then a response that demonstrates an understanding of that turn as having been intensified. Something that displays an understanding of what was said as being remarkable, unexpected, not just some kind of plain news. And this is a key argument in conversation analysis. How does somebody respond to what just happened? Because that displays their understanding of what you just said. We don't need to ask a third person 6 days later, what do you think that meant? Because people who were there are constantly showing each other what they understood. But we're going to look at some slightly more complex cases because, of course, we're human beings and not robots, and things don't always work that way. So there's a couple of cases. One of them is thinking about the evidence, because you can't just agree with somebody without having the evidence to agree, and this is one of the negotiations that we go through. So we have to share knowledge. So here, B is complaining to A about B's boyfriend's eating habits. And her complaint is that he can eat whatever he likes and he never puts on weight. So skinny.
Alex, I've never seen anybody eat as much as he does, and he's so skinny.
Okay, so there's intensification in so skinny. And what we're supposed to see now is oh my God, or wow, right? What do we get?
Mm-hmm.
That's not enough. That's not enough. You're not supposed to do that. All that A is doing is saying, okay, carry on with your story, but I don't know. So what does B do with that? Well, B gives evidence for her complaint. So she treats the as inadequate, and she reformulates what she said. And the way she does that is by starting to elaborate how much food this guy actually eats. She provides evidence for her assessment. Can you play?
I mean, the amount of cereal he eats, like between meals and after meals.
Okay. So this is not meal times, this is snacks. Yeah. And the next one?
We go through a box of cereal every 2 days.
Remember what I said about numbers? Numbers provide evidence. So a box of cereal every 2 days, that's a lot of cereal. Right? And now we get what we should have had, a confirmation check.
Wow.
Really? Yeah? Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah?
In your letter, you said that he eats constantly.
Oh my God.
Really?
Alex, I've never seen anybody eat as much as he does, and he's so skinny.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the amount of cereal he eats, like between meals and after meals.
Yeah.
We go through a box of cereal every 2 days.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, now you're laughing because of the wow, I think. But the fact that she says wow is enough. It doesn't matter how you say it. Actually, wow is very often like this, quiet and low-pitched. But the fact that you say wow and not that's the thing that matters here. And the next slide, if we block out all the bits between so skinny and wow, in other words, wow is responding to so skinny. It's not responding to the thing before, it's responding to the so skinny. So if we block all that out and listen to it, it sounds perfectly okay.
Alex, I've never seen anybody eat as much as he does, and he's so skinny.
Wow.
That's perfectly natural, right? That would be perfectly okay. So what we've got in the stuff behind that box is what we call an insert sequence, right? The wow belongs with so skinny. And so something has been inserted in between, and the thing that's been inserted is dealing with, do you know enough about what I said to appreciate it? And once we've got to the level where we've understood each other properly, then we can do wow. And if you think wow is about surprise, all I can say to you is it takes a lot of work to display surprise. Now, that next one is a bit similar, except this one is about understanding what is it we're talking about. So we'll just hear this first one.
You would have loved this house we saw, honey.
Okay, next one. Oh, yeah?
Oh, yeah.
So there's a go-ahead to tell the next thing. And now here's the intensified thing.
It was unbelievable.
Unbelievable. And now let's see how she treats that.
Frank Lloyd Wright, huh?
Now that's not anything that deals with unbelievable. That's checking which house are we talking about, right? And she names who it is. So this is an understanding check, and she can only really go along with unbelievable if she knows what it is that we're talking about. What is it that's unbelievable?
Yeah.
He says, yeah. So there's a confirmation, an understanding check and a confirmation. And now, now that is an appreciation of unbelievable. So lines 4 and 5, that's another insert sequence. That's dealing with, are we talking about the right thing here? And the is responding to unbelievable. So we have a structure in conversation. You can see it really beautifully at work. That's
You would have loved this house we saw, honey.
Oh, yeah.
It was unbelievable.
Frank Lloyd Wright.
Yeah.
Oh.
It would be nice to live in now.
Okay, and then if we take away the insert sequence, this
You
works.
would have loved this house we saw, honey.
Oh, yeah.
It was unbelievable.
Oh.
It would be nice to live in now.
Okay. So, yeah, I was going to say something really deep and meaningful, and I've forgotten it. So on the, I know what it was. On the left are things, no, on the right are things that you should say in response to intensification, and on the left are things which, if you say these in response to intensification, that won't be enough. However, we can do work which might be about understanding what the other person's talking about or getting the evidence or whatever. We can do work to enable us to produce the right kind of response, or the kind of response that you should give, which is the kind on the right in red, like wow, oh my God, gosh, oh no, and those sorts of things. So that's to say, what I set out earlier as a sort of, as a structure, it's not a rule. It's just a norm. It's the way things are meant to be. And we have methods for dealing with what happens when things don't go the way they're supposed to go. Okay, yes, next one, please. So here's the basic structure. First, a turn with intensification, and then second, an understanding of that with a possible insert sequence to deal with a problem in between so that you can align your response with what came. So we have to negotiate the details of what we know, what we have access to, what we're talking about, and so on. Now I'm going to show you quickly some resistance. How do you resist the other person's line, or being heard to resist, because we've got some cases where the other person never responds to the intensification the way that they are supposed to. Here are two young mothers. One of them has got a baby, the other is about to have a baby, and they're talking about how you feed the baby. And A is telling B about the magic of breastfeeding. If you breastfeed a baby, apparently their excrement does not smell. Would you like to play it?
Their number twos don't smell at all.
And you can hear that's intensified. Their number twos don't smell at all. Okay. Let's
Okay.
Right? That's one of those inadequate responses. It's not displaying amazement or anything. And the next one. Now, the strategy that A has is to try again. Let's say the same thing in a different way.
They don't smell like anything.
Can you hear how high her pitch is going? They don't smell like anything. And then she carries on. It looks like shit, but it doesn't smell like anything.
It's like, it looks like shit, but it doesn't smell like anything.
That's pretty much as high as pitch can go, right? And you can see that this is full of intensification. It is begging for some sort of alignment, some sort of positive affiliating response from the other. Let's see what happens.
Okay.
She doesn't get it. It doesn't work. So what happens next?
And did you pump or not?
So now she talks about how did you get the milk. That's it. So B is not having any of this. She's moving. So it's perfectly possible to resist intensification. But the fact that you resist one time and then the person who's intensifying tries again and again, usually after 3 attempts, people stop. That seems to be a magic number when people try complaining or try to get agreement. They do it 3 times, and after 3 times, if the other person hasn't gone along with them, they move on. This time, it's the other speaker who moves on, not the one who's doing the intensification. Let's hear the whole sequence.
But if they're totally breast milk for like the first couple months, their number twos don't smell at all.
Okay.
They don't smell like anything. It's like,
It looks like shit, but it doesn't smell
Oh,
like anything.
And did you pump or not?
Yeah, I pumped.
Okay, so this is what happens. Resistance, resistance, finally we exit. That's also a possible sequence. One more, I think. Oh, this is the pie example coming up. Yeah, so this is the huge pieces that we saw earlier. Can you just play the audio?
Huge pieces. I think the pie was probably cut in 6.
Okay, so there's the pie with 6 pieces. And now the next one.
Oh my.
Oh my. Now you can hear how quiet and fast that is. And it's the right words, but it doesn't sound like it's done in the right way. And let's see how that gets treated.
You know?
So it's treated as not enough. And if you wanted to to understand what sort of intonation should you do in that situation, then the you know is clearly treating oh my as not enough of a response to align with how many pieces of pie there were.
Wow.
Wow. Very quiet and creaky. And now let's see. Next one.
Or even 5.
Now the description gets modified from 6 pieces to 5. That means the pieces are going to be bigger. And then she just, I don't know if you can hear that. Yeah. Don't worry. There we go. I think Veronica's been talking to you about these things. They're really, really important in conversation because you can tell when people are about to speak, even if they don't actually say anything.
Huge pieces.
So there we have another intensified thing. And again.
Oh, yay. Wow.
So finally we get an appreciation of this telling, but it's kind of a bit tokenistic, right? It's not engaged in the same way as the others are. And then the sequence gets closed down and moved on with, anyway, that was fun. So A is giving up on talking about the pie. And if you think about it, she doesn't say very much about the pie except that there were big pieces. I mean, she doesn't, in other words, I think B is probably dealing with the fact that there's probably not enough there to respond to.
We went to Christopher's.
Oh, did you? Oh, yeah, that's right. You mentioned that. Yeah, had pecan pie.
Huge pieces. I think the pie was probably cut in 6.
Oh, my.
You know?
Wow.
Or even 5. Huge
Yay.
pieces.
Wow.
So anyway, that was fun.
I don't know if I've ever been to Christopher's, you know?
So there we are. That's the end of the talk, really. Here's some conclusions. You can find intensification in lots of different situations. So people use it in storytelling, complaining, informing. It's not just tone of voice. There's a lot of other linguistic structure involved, which includes lexical choice, its position, and it's not just either the duration of the consonants and the vowels, and it's not just the pitch movements, it's all the things that come before it as well, like the little bits of creak and the dramatic pauses and the rhythm and so forth. And why is it used? Well, it looks like intensification is used as a device to get somebody to align with what you're saying. So if you produce something in an intensified way, the response that the other person is supposed to give is one that aligns with yours. And we can see that through the work that people do to make sure that they understand what it is they're talking about, or that they have the same sort of access to it. And all those little insert sequences seem to provide evidence for that. But the basic thing is that if you do something with intensification, the response to it is supposed to be something that treats it as something special, marked, different, extraordinary, something along those lines. So, in a way, it's a device for persuasion. That's one of the things it's doing. It's about creating some kind of social alignment and solidarity when we do things together, like complaining, informing, and storytelling. And of course, those activities are also central to gossip, which is one of the things that we do most when we talk, right? We tell each other stories. Even when we complain, one of the things we're usually doing when we're complaining is we're building our social bonds. So intensification is a really important part of our socialization as humans through interaction, talking to each other. Yeah, and the other thing I just want to say is that when I was learning linguistics, nobody ever worked on conversation. It was seen as too messy, unordered, improper. Linguists should work in the laboratory. And one of the reasons I started doing conversation analysis and stuck with it is because I realized that those things were not true. Language is very ordered, it's very organized, and there are very routine, socially organized ways of using language to interact with each other. I'm not denying that we need to go into the lab and do those things as well, but we can actually work with conversation and say some really interesting things about it because it's ordered, it is orderly. Yeah. That's where I want to stop. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. Now we've got some time for questions, so we really appreciate your comments, questions. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for your talk. We really appreciate it. We read a lot of your work here in university.
Oh, thank you.
Just a quick question about the thing that you mentioned before about the use of the noun main. Do you mean like the state?
Yeah.
And why do you think that that's there?
Is this microphone? Yes, it is working.
Yeah.
I haven't brought the example with me, but if I remember right, it's something like, I haven't eaten fish since Maine. Okay? So it's actually not a reference to the state. It's a reference to when I was in Maine. And by doing it that way, it suggests I was in Maine a long time ago.
Oh, okay, right.
Get it?
Yeah.
So it's not like,
more like an idiomatic thing, maybe?
Sorry?
Like an idiomatic thing, maybe?
It's not an idiomatic thing, it's simply a time reference. What I was going to say, it's not like we all have an image of New York, right?
Yeah.
We all have an image of New Yorkers. And talk about New York. This is New York.
Right, yeah.
Right, which you could imagine was somebody loud, pushy,
exactly.
Witty, rude, very, very stereotypically New York. Right, you could imagine that. But I don't know about you, but I have no stereotype for the state of Maine. But in the context it occurs in, it's a time reference. It's a time reference, so it's saying it was a long time since. I haven't eaten fish since Maine.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Hello, my name is Wilson, and I was questioning about the way we use intensification.
Can you put your microphone
more closer?
Yes,
yeah.
Thank you.
I was wondering if there is a context or a way we use intensification more prominent, because I feel like we use intensification not only for negative things or to explain extreme things. Like, is there I don't know how to explain it, like, intensification. What kind of uses it has intensification aside from giving back from... Sorry, I'm not really finding a way to make the question. I just want to know the uses intensification has and the prominent uses it has.
Uh-huh. What are the uses of intensification? Well, if you go to the very first examples I showed where you say something and then it's resisted, then you say it again, that's a very basic use of it. So it makes a stronger version of something.
Is it the only use?
Is it the only use? That's not an easy question to answer. I mean, if you think about, the so skinny example, one of the uses there is to make it a complaint. One of the things that it's doing is to mention, it's not just that he's so skinny, it's that him being skinny is complainable and in some sense unfair. There's that sort of sense there. And I think that comes about because of the non-neutral sense that intensification gives to something. So there's a simple answer to your question, and then there's a much more philosophical and deeper one which is much harder to answer, and I think needs thinking about case by case. I think as an interactionalist, I would probably say, let's just look at what happens. What are they designed to solicit? What should you do next? So, do you remember the woman in the convent who was eaten alive by fleas? She could have said that neutrally, but by not saying it neutrally, one of the things it's supposed to elicit from the other person is sympathy. So, in some sense, it's about getting the right sort of response to whatever action that turn of talk is doing. Does that make sense?
Have we got any more questions? Oh, yes, many questions. I'm just going to go there.
Hello. Oh, sorry. Well, I was just wondering about how the fact that intensification is like kind of to get alignment with your opinion, how does that affect how we communicate with maybe not like personal, but with media in the big like sense of the word, like with news and maybe with social media, because you're always trying to get like a kind of opinion back with the language that we use, and that is, I think, very more like meticulously thought out, not as much as plain day-to-day conversation.
I'm not sure I heard the question properly. It was about social, did you say social media?
It's kind of a long question. Okay. How does the fact that intensification like tries to get alignment with the opinion that is trying to be like expressed,
yeah,
and how that affects how we speak, maybe in not like personal things, but in more general, like when maybe in the news, like they say things a certain way.
Ah, okay.
In the news. Like, this is very common in Chile. I don't know about in England, but yeah, language is kind of used in that way, I think.
I think I understood you now. So, the data I work on is always in interaction, and I think what you're talking about is monologue, in the sense that when you read the news, it's a monologue, it's not a conversation. So I don't know exactly. I think, though, the social media examples I showed you at the beginning, with the so cute and those sorts of things, they are say, a little bit like the horrible case that it's a way of making a strong claim or making a strong assessment of something. I honestly don't know the answer to your question, but I think I would say that that kind of material is parasitic on everyday talk. So if you want to answer that question, you need to understand what happens in conversation first, because that's the native home of this phenomenon. Then I think you need to think about what are the uses that a newsreader would put this to. Is it about highlighting certain kinds of information? Is it about presenting a particular point of view? Is it about focusing the news or focusing the audience's attention in a certain way? And that, I think, is also a political question, actually. And I think, just reflecting, that may be one reason why I avoid that kind of news program. That's not a very good answer to your question, but it's the best one I have.
We had 2 more questions around here. Okay.
Hi, I don't have a question, I have a comment. First, I want to thank to our teachers because they organized this event. And also, I want to thank to you because of this knowledge you just have shared with us. Because I think it's important for us to know, as future teachers, how to respond to a student maybe that is complaining about something. I don't know if that student maybe couldn't go to your test and that student is telling you, I couldn't go because my dog died or whatever, and you just answer, okay, so what are you gonna do? I don't think that's a good response when a student is explaining to you something. So I think this knowledge is important for us as future teachers because we have to know how we give them the understanding of their problem through this response of their intensification in everyday talk, because it's not only in English as well, it's part of our language. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
We have one more question there. And I know that many of you have to go to class soon, so we're gonna probably wrap it up soon.
Hello. I was wondering if can we find intensification that starts with one speaker and is followed by another? Because I think in the case we saw that one speaker would intensify what he said, but can we find some sequence where one speaker starts and then the second one intensifies what the other one said?
That's a really interesting point. I don't think I have examples of that, and I think the reason is probably that the data comes from Coolhome, and one person is in the United States and the other is somewhere else in the world. And one of the things that they're most usually doing is catching up with each other. So usually they're telling each other news, what's happened, stories, and so on. I think the kind of thing you're describing is probably something people do more when they're co-telling. In other words, when they're telling a story together, which probably involves a bit of acting and, you know, I don't know if you've read the work of Marina Cantarutti. She's another student from York, but Marina's data is full of this kind of stuff where people invent little worlds for each other and they tell something together, they start to enact it as themselves or as somebody else, and the other one joins in with that. And so it's not one person telling another a story, but the two making a story together. So I think that the kind of thing that you're describing is more likely to occur in that environment. And I don't think I have it in Call Home, and I think the reason is because of the work that Call Home calls are doing. But that would be really, really nice to get. Thank you. That's an inspiring idea.
Thank
Which
you.
I won't pursue. That's an idea. That's an idea for you. You go and find that data. You go and find that data.
Do you have a question? Okay.
Yes, he does. He's been waiting.
I'm sorry. Thank you for the talk. It was really fascinating. I'm not sure this question is a bit far-fetched, but I was wondering if this sort of analysis of intensification and conversation in general could be applied to like criminal psychology and stuff like that?
Aha. Yeah. I currently have a student who's working on police interviews with suspects. And we're not looking at this. But I think one of the things that's very interesting is the dynamic of those interactions is completely different from this, right? They're one-sided interactions. Only one person has the right to ask questions. The other person has an obligation to respond, even if the response is to say no comment. So the power dynamics are really different there. I think we have a lot to learn about how those kinds of conversations work and how is it that people enact institutional norms and how are they different from day-to-day interactions. One of the things that's very striking about the data I've seen is that for the police, these interviews are normal, they're everyday things. They know how they work. For most of the suspects, this is the first time. They don't know how they work. So there's another kind of level of understanding there. Now, the reason for saying all of that is I think you can see from the material I showed you that in everyday conversation, we do a lot of work to establish what we know, how we know it, how we come to know it, why it matters, what it enables us to say. And of course, in a situation like a forensic investigation, knowledge is absolutely key. That's what the police are after. So I feel like, and we've seen this in CA through its work on medical interactions, for example. These very small moments, which in everyday talk would look very insignificant, can actually turn out to be very important moments in institutional interaction. So I think there's a good, strong case to make for taking the method and applying it to a different environment. I don't know what you would find, but I think thinking about the negotiation of knowledge and how that happens linguistically through the organization of questions and answers, because that's the very concrete stuff that we have to look at. That would be a really worthwhile project.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. You've got one more question, and I think we do have time for that question.
Hi, Richard. Thank you very much for your talk. Very sort of mind-opening. Do you know if there are studies revealing, for example, differences between intensification by men and women, gender differences? Another thing that comes to mind is, I was wondering when children learn how to intensify and how they do it in the earlier stages and how they sort of advance in the techniques and vocabulary and ways, different ways.
Yes, those are two very profound questions, actually. So the first one on the gendered patterning of this. You've probably noticed that most of the data was from women, and that's just an accident. Maybe it isn't an accident, but my take on this is that so Cool Home has roughly an equal balance of men and women. Many of the phone calls between men, so two men, are, let's just be blunt, they're boring. They talk about things like, did you buy the car? Yeah, I bought the car. How much did you pay? I bought it. How big is it? And we have lots of those kinds of very factual exchanges. The calls that these are taken from are calls where people are talking about things that matter to them. So important moments in their life. We've got stories of breakup, we've got stories of friendships being made, pregnancy, handling a baby, being afraid, fears, all those sorts of things. And now, my take on it would be perhaps the way that the intensification turns up along with certain kinds of social action, like storytelling, like complaining, and so on. If women do more storytelling and more complaining and more da-da-da-da than men do, then we will find more intensification in the speech of women. That's not because they're women, it's because those are the actions that they're doing in those phone calls. So I think it's about the patterning of the activities rather than a straightforward women talk like this and men talk like that. I think it's more to do with the sorts of things that people do when they talk together. And of course there are different patterns there. We have got men that produce more intensification and so on. On the matter of acquisition, I think this is something that as conversation analysts we just don't know enough about. We don't know enough about how we become good, competent interactants. As linguists, we've got pretty good understandings of how we acquire the formal structures of language, but I don't think we have particularly good understandings of how we become competent users of our language. And I think intensification and the things that go with it, like storytelling. How and when do we learn to tell stories? We know that some people are really good at telling stories and they can sit there and entertain you for hours, and there are other people who are just hopeless. They can't tell you a story for their life. But that's a skill that we acquire, so how do we acquire it? I don't think we know enough about that. Another way to answer the same question would be, as babies or as infants, we interact with our carers, and one of the basic things that those carers are doing is very melodic and rhythmical behavior, right? We do a lot of singing, a lot of tickling, a lot of laughing, and these are very typically melodic, rhythmical things. And of course, that's the foundation of prosody, and that's the foundation. And if you can't do rhythm and intonation, then you can't speak. You need those things to be able to speak. So there's something very fundamental about those. And again, I feel like that's a gap certainly in my knowledge of how we become interactants. But we are interactants from the moment we're born, right? As soon as we're born, we're interacting with other human beings. So I think there's a whole box of goodies there to explore. Those would be my best answers to your questions.
Well, we've got a little present for you. Oh, let's not drop it.
Oh, thank you. I would just like to say thank you to Veronica. It's, You know, it's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you all for hosting me, and thank you for coming. It means a lot that so many of you came today, so thank you. I'm very honored to have you come to my talk. Thank you.
Okay, so if anybody's got like a really urgent question, you can come because we're going to stay here for a few more minutes, okay? Thank you for coming.